we need to go to the dentist, we go to the physical doctor when we need to go to a physical doctor. And likewise, there is absolutely science and evidence-based therapies that can help us in our mental health struggles as well. There is no shame in reaching out for help. It is an act of courage, and I encourage anybody who is struggling to please reach out because there is help available. We do want to hear from you, and we're here to help.
We've been speaking with Melinda Johnson. Our topic has been mental health resources for families. Thanks for joining us today, Melinda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Family Matters. To learn more about the Center for Family Care, please visit family.goarch.org. That's family.goarch.org. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Proclaiming Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is July 10th, 2022, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. We get together here on Sunday nights to get to know Orthodox Christians and to build community through conversation. You know, our Orthodox community can be really fragmented because here in the United States, you know, and throughout the diaspora, right, you worship in different jurisdictions, different languages. Plus, we're divided up regionally as well. The United States is a big country, you know, and people on the West Coast don't necessarily know people on the East Coast or in the Midwest. So I think it's just wonderful to get an opportunity to bring in different Orthodox people from different parts of the country, from different parts of the world sometimes, and from different jurisdictions. And it helps us get to know each other. And, you know, who knows, maybe we can build a little grassroots unity here in our church. You know, we have plenty of time for the hierarchy to catch up with us, but we can all be one Orthodox body if we all get to know each other here. So, and plus, I just think Orthodox people are fascinating. You know, I go to coffee hour and I'll sit down next to someone and ask them a question. And before you know it, we're on this amazing journey going through hearing about their lives, finding out that, you know, this quiet guy who sat next to you in liturgy all these years turns out to have had a fantastically interesting past and you didn't even know about it. So I think I love this show. And we come from all different countries, all different backgrounds, right? There's so many Orthodox immigrants who've come over from faraway places. And of course, their children grow up in fun, interesting immigrant families. But we also have a lot of Orthodox converts. And we've all come in from different places, you know. So, and tonight is no exception. We'll be speaking with an Orthodox Christian who is a convert and who actually comes, she's both Native American and Mexican American. And so I think, you know, that's just such a unique opportunity, right? Like how many native Orthodox do we know? So this is, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm glad that you're here with us tonight. Our producer is Matushka Trudy Richter. She is right here engineering the program, and she's taking your calls. So you can call in. It's 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. 2346. So you can call in with any questions you might have for our guest. And I think you're going to like our guest. I sure do. Her name is Rebecca Hernandez. And so she actually was the director of UC Santa Cruz's American Indian Resource Center. And then recently she became the university's first community archivist. So she collects and preserves local history. And we're going to hear all about her journey, her advocacy for Orthodoxy among Native Americans and for Native Americans among the Orthodox, and just find out how did she stumble across Orthodoxy, and what was it about Orthodoxy that called to her. So I'm excited to get to know Rebecca tonight, and I'm glad you've joined us. So without any further ado, Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Hi everyone.
Hi, it's so good to have you on the show, Rebecca. I'm
Thank
excited
you.
to have you. So tell me your story. Is it California? Were you born in California?
Yes, I was. I was born in Los Angeles, in the city of Alhambra specifically, which is about 10 miles from downtown LA. And I grew up in a Protestant family, and very devout, and specifically Baptist. And my mom was Native, my dad was Mexican American, and it was, go ahead.
Is it just me, or is that funny? It's just funny that you would say Baptist if you have a Native American family and Mexican American family. It's funny. How did they find their way to Baptist church?
There's a long tradition of Christianity in Indian country, from the time of contact on. And so different types of Christians ended up in different parts of the country and engaged with Native people. And sometimes they brought Christianity, well, I would say 99% of the time, they brought Christianity vis-a-vis the sword, right?
Right.
It's not a pleasant history at all. But despite the fact that it is so unpleasant, many, many Native people engaged with the faith and became members of various communities. And for a lot of Native people in, depending on where they are in the United States, right? So they would be Protestant or Catholic mostly, with the exception of Alaska, where the Russians came in and brought Orthodoxy. So that's how that worked. And my family is pretty unique in that both my parents were Protestant and grew up in the same neighborhood and married and raised us Protestant. And
wow.
And then I went to a Catholic college.
And, where'd you go?
I went to the College of Santa Fe in New Mexico. So I should say that my dad's family was from both my parents have passed. So my dad's family was from El Paso, Texas, and my mom's family comes from Mescalero Apache Reservation in what is today New Mexico. And so I'm, but they're both multiple generations obviously my mom, right, always American, but my dad's family had been here. He's a second generation, so I'm third generation. So it's kind of interesting, right, because the way that our family understood ourselves as Americans, right, it was deeply rooted in who we are. And so I grew up in Los Angeles, like I mentioned, and my mom did also. So I'm what is often referred to as an urban Indian, meaning that I grew up away from my community in a city and had the same experiences as everybody else in that place. And my ethnicity, wasn't really central to, my understanding of self as I was growing up, although we knew a lot about our history. I just grew up in such with so many different ethnicities, people of like just hundreds of ethnicities, that it was a beautiful way to grow up and to really appreciate difference. And so I'm always very appreciative of that. And then I ended up going to New Mexico for college, and I chose the College of Santa Fe because I had a great art program, and that was my major. And then it was also where the Institute of American Indian Arts was located. They shared a campus at that time. So it was a perfect place to land. I was able to, really celebrate who I am as a Native person, because there were so many Native students, and it was the first time in my life that I was around so many Native people at once.
Wow.
And so it really helped me to just to feel more comfortable and start to, begin to have conversations about my experience. And it also really got me interested in the American Indian history of the United States. So after leaving that college, I went on. So a bulk of my life has been spent in school, so it's kind of easier for me to talk about myself from, in that trajectory.
Right.
But I ended up coming back to California, and I was working for a little while and really wanted to work in museums. And because I was an artist and wanted to be around, right, beautiful things. So
Sure.
I went to Cal State Fullerton, where I earned a master's of fine art in exhibition design and museum studies. And my focus there was really to prepare me to start working in the museum field. And it was a wonderful program, and I learned a lot, and I was ready to, go get a job in a museum and keep my own art kind of on the back burner, but still doing it. And it was there that I first discovered I was an intern at the Southwest Museum in Los Angeles, which is now the Autry Center for the West. And I as an intern, I was working on a project with someone there, and there was a box of slides of Alaska, particularly the Aleutian chain, slides of some that belonged to some people who donated them, who had been on the islands at the turn of the last century, and documented these just what was going on there. And of course, the elite Orthodox services were things that they were really interested in, and they took a lot of pictures of clergy and the processions and the churches. And I thought,
wow,
I remember looking at them and thinking, what is this? Because I neglected to mention that after college, right after my bachelor's degree, because I was at a Catholic college, and I was being taught by priests and nuns and just amazing, Christian brothers. And I was immersed in a Catholic space. And I think for me, that was the first time, having come out of a very different kind of Christian expression, that I was introduced to a calendar, an annual calendar, and the idea of celebrating in a very formalized way. And that I could go into the church and expect the Mass to be the same every single time. And there was a lot of comfort in that for me. And so I
see, a lot of
found
Baptists
that,
find that as a negative, right? Like a lot coming from a Baptist tradition.
Wow, this is great, And plus, I had all these clergy around me all the time that were very easy to talk to because they were my teachers, or they were, working in the offices or whatever, and it just made it really, really easy, and they were accessible. And so what happened was, rather than being these like really intimidating figures that they might have been if I just walked into a Catholic church, right? They were people I interacted with every day. And so the fact that we could be together, eat lunch together, joke around, I saw them as just people like us, Yeah. And so that took away some of that mystery and some of the intimidation. And I actually converted to Catholicism right after I graduated from college. And, my family wasn't really excited about that. But I think for me, what ended up being of great comfort to them is that I loved being at church. And so I really did the deep dive and loved, was very, very active in my parish, and loved going to church. And that's one thing I really miss moving into Orthodoxy, is that you can attend Mass every day as a Catholic. You can find a Mass anywhere where you live. And I really miss that. And so, but that's a side note. So I ended up finding these slides, and I thought, okay, well, my then supervisor said, well, this looks like they could be Orthodox, so maybe you should go, look for an Orthodox church, take a few, and just ask them, what do they know? This was before the internet was a really big thing. And I said,
Right.
okay, so I went to the phone book and, I'm dating myself here. And I looked up Orthodox churches, and there was one in Alhambra where I was born and raised. And
St. Stephen's, right there, a
happened
cathedral
to be,
right by your
yes,
house.
a cathedral.
Had you ever
And so-
even noticed that St. Stephen's existed before this
Oh,
moment?
yeah. Everyone in Alhambra knows St. Stephen's is there. It's a very gigantic, it's a cathedral. So
It's big.
It's kind of, the light on the hill there. And so, but I thought, Serbian Orthodox, so I called up and said, I'm just doing some research and wondering if there's someone I can talk to. And there was an education director there at the time, John, and he was wonderful. And I made an appointment to go see him and said, hey, I'm doing this research for the museum and I don't know anything about Orthodoxy. So he went on to explain that, yes, the church had a very significant presence, especially on the Aleutian Islands, and, shared a little bit about it with me and gave me some books that I should consider reading. One of them, of course, Orthodox Alaska, and then Timothy Ware's great book, The Orthodox Way. Yes. So I now he's Bishop Callistos, but
right.
And so so I walked over to the church with him, and he said, "I'll give you a tour," and turned on the lights in this beautiful cathedral, and it was like, whoa, I was just. It's hard to describe how, at once comforting and overwhelming it felt. And it was very familiar, of course, because, Catholic and Orthodox churches, you kind of get what's going on, right? A little more than you would if you just walked in from the Baptist tradition. I noticed that there weren't any statues, but everything else seemed very, I knew what things were, but the icons were a little off-putting for me. I was trying to figure those out. But we had a great talk, and he encouraged me to visit that church. But what I really appreciate about John, and I'll always be super grateful for, is that he said, you know what, Rebecca, you should go out and visit as many Orthodox churches in this area as you can, because each one really has a very different way of not the core of the experience is the same, but because it's different ethnicities, there's different traditions, and some you might really, enjoy, and others might be confusing, but nevertheless, if you have any questions, come back and talk to me. So I visited OCA parishes, Russian parishes, Greek, Antiochian, and of course the beautiful Antiochian Cathedral in Los Angeles, St. Anthony. I mean, that walking into that church and seeing people there, Arabic on the icons, and just that's what he meant, right? That everywhere you go, there's differences, though that's all rooted in the same tradition. And the people and the music in the Antiochian tradition, even to this day, is probably my most favorite. There's just something about it that I really resonate with, and I just loved it. So all this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that he sent you.
Catholic,
I
right?
I have to say, I love that he sent you to various different kinds, right? Because St. Stephen's, our listeners might not know, St. Stephen's Cathedral is a Serbian cathedral.
Yes.
So you've got the Serbian church, and he's right. I don't know. I just want to say that I think that's really neat, because when I first came into the church, I was in the Serbian church, and then I was in the OCA, and then in the Greek church. And I just highly recommend to new people, and actually to old people, to cradles as well, spend a little time in different kinds of parishes and different jurisdictions, because it really does help you understand what is Orthodox and what is just sort of an ethnic tradition that's happening within that orthodoxy, right? Like, because there is a difference. There really is a difference in different places, and yet they're all the same thing. It's beautiful. I love that. Okay. So
and
meanwhile,
it is important. And I, like you, I encourage folks that are listening that may or may not be Orthodox. Either way, I think you should do that. There's probably Orthodox churches all around you that, you would just have very different experiences in. And each one is very beautiful, So I ended up, like I said, I was a very happy Catholic, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. And, but as I began to learn more about Orthodoxy, I was really feeling a lot of different things and wondering, is it just something, a lot about it really beckoned to me. And also, I really took the deep dive when I became a Catholic, and I studied for while I was a senior in college. And then I studied for about 5 years before I converted to Orthodoxy, because I was really not sure, I liked being Catholic, and I loved many things about it, and I missed many things about it. The diversity within the parishes, meaning the ethnic diversity in the parishes, right? The fact that it's so huge. I mean, you can go anywhere at any time and find a Catholic church. I mean, that's just the reality, right? And so there's something about knowing that there's a community right there. Again, like I said, you could go to Mass every single day, and I often did. Certainly in college I did, and I wasn't even Catholic. I just liked going to the Mass, and I liked learning to pray the Rosary, because it's a meditative practice that I didn't have as a Protestant, and it helped me to calm my mind and just to reflect on moments of Christ's life and the Theotokos. And so those traditions for me are what really brought me to Catholicism. And then as I was studying about Orthodoxy, I was really, I thought, this is, this is starting to feel a little difficult for me. About year 3, by that time I had finished the Museum Studies program, and I was at UCLA in the American Indian Studies program, where I was working on a master's. And it was there that I started to write more formally about Native Christian art. Because I was writing about Native art, and I noticed that Native Christian art was never really written about, but it exists. And the reason that people don't write about it is because it's very complicated to talk about about Christianity and Native people, because again, we return to the fact that Christianity came and was an incredibly destructive force in our communities. And it was under the umbrella of Christianity that we were enslaved, that we were forced to become whatever Christian, denomination happened to be there. We weren't even, for many, many Christian people, there was debate about whether we were even human. So there's a lot of that, that reality, that truth is something that people don't know how to grapple with very well, and they don't want to appear to be apologists for the church, so they just ignore it. They ignore the art, right? Or they ignore the history. And
well, it's hard, right? I mean, how do you talk about it? Because that is really a big problem, right? Is that to say, okay, well, now there's this beautiful faith and this person has this beautiful art, but also that beauty comes from somewhere else. I mean, in a lot of ways, though, that's our challenge as Americans, is to find a way to look at our history that is so mixed, and there's so much ugliness, and yet there's also so much beauty, and to try to sift through it. And because, I think you could say the same thing if you look at like slave communities, right? Like people who've come over from Africa, and the Christianity maybe came to them during slavery, and not in a beautiful way, not in a welcoming way, not in a wonderful way. And yet, there's this tradition of music and art that is just wonderful. And it just is what life is, isn't it? There's just a lot.
Yes. You can definitely draw parallels there. And I think that's a beautiful way in which to think about it, that because of God's grace, and, when I do talk about it, I say, Native people came to the church over time. It was obviously it was by force in many cases, most cases. But today in 2022, it's a choice. And
right.
So the fact that Native people are choosing to be Christians comes out of that ugly history, but nevertheless, it is a tradition. It's part of our history now. We're still a very young country, but for about 200 years, people have been engaging with Christianity, and they are, they identify with the tradition as much as any other community does now. So it's been an interesting thing to think about and write about, but while I was at UCLA, I was able to travel to Alaska and to attend all of the festivities around St. Herman's Feast Day, which was a beautiful experience. And I met many LEU Orthodox there, and of course, and I just want to say, to folks that if you ever have the opportunity to do that, it was truly, I wasn't Orthodox yet, but it was truly a life-changing experience for me, especially as a Native person, because the church was filled with Aleut Orthodox. The entire liturgy was done in the Aleut language. All the singing was in Aleut. And I saw for the first time an Orthodox community that looked like me, that, understood the world in a similar way, engaged with people in a similar way. And it was really beautiful. And the story of the Russian Orthodox Church in Alaska is no different. I want to make that very clear. There's some really highly romanticized, information out there about what happened in Alaska. And that wasn't, there was a lot that went down that was really bad.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because I think, so I have read a biography of St. Herman, and he seemed to be very sweet and very good. And sort of the way that they set it up was like the Russian fur traders were nasty to the Native people, but St. Herman was always trying to make things better, and he was trying to improve it. But
Absolutely.
Is that accurate? And is that true of all the Orthodox up there? And what do you make of the fur traders who are also Orthodox people? We talk about them like, well, these awful, weird fur traders, we don't know who those guys are. It's like, well, they're all baptized Orthodox, frankly, but...
Exactly. They were Orthodox Christians that came over, and the way they justified enslaving the Aleut people and forcing them to hunt furs, which was completely against the ethos of the indigenous people there to overhunt. They basically rounded up all the men and forced them to become hunters, and killed them if they didn't bring in, enough furs. It was a brutal, ugly type. It was slavery. So there's nothing pleasant about slavery. The Russian American company was responsible for that. And they did mass baptisms because what they wanted to be able to say is that everybody on this ship is Orthodox. So we're all moving in the same direction. We're all the same. Right? So they did these really, really strange things where they tried to justify, like, to the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church, who was closely linked to the Tsar. And, there's a big history there. But they needed to justify why they were doing this to the local people. And the way they did that was to say, well, they're baptized. They accepted Orthodoxy. We're all one big happy family. And what they did, of course, was take the men and left the women and children. And then the women were taken and used to process the pelts. And so many, many people died very rapidly. And there were many orphans. And that's what St. Herman did, is he came in and he created an orphanage, and he served the young orphaned children. And he was just an amazing human being. He came from Russia. He saw the devastation. You read the biography, so he was just heartbroken over what he saw and what he witnessed. And through the help of the church, over time, they built a school and an orphanage, and he served that community till his death. So there were many people over the course of his lifetime who, Eliut people who, because of his example and witness to them, became clergy and nuns and, built the churches there and served that community, and they rebuilt. And, over time, the Eliut people, understood themselves as Orthodox Christians, and that it is indeed rooted in who they are today. So that's how that happened. But it's not, I don't think that it's any different than what happened in the lower 48.
Yeah.
So I just like to be really honest about that. Because there, like I said, there's a lot. But St. Herman is there are many saints of the Americas. He and Innocent, certainly St. Innocent, had a huge role in translating the Bible.
Yeah. Well, and that was sort of the beautiful thing about the Russians coming in at that time, the church Russians, not the company Russians or whatever you want to say, but that they were very focused on ordaining Inuit people and on translating texts and the liturgy and the Bible and everything else into the native tongue, and to really I thought it was lovely, the idea that it wasn't going to be a bunch of Russian priests beating people over the head, but it was going to be, native priests and trying to build a native faith. But there is a way that when we talk about it, it's like, well, the saints are ours. Those other guys, we don't know who they were. And it's like,
right.
Well, it's a bunch of Russian Orthodox people. I mean, it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's interesting. It's an interesting tension between the folks that came over. And I think for all Native people, it was very confusing, the way that Christianity was introduced, just, trying to understand who these people were in relationship to this teacher they called Christ, that this teacher, basically approved of all of these horrific things that they did to other human beings, and under the guise of progress. And even as late in the United States, as late as the 1950s and 60s, there were still residential schools where American Indian children were taken. And this is a really ugly history in the United States. And now we're finding mass graves. Children were taken as young as 3 years old, and, mass graves at these facilities, and they were run by Christians. So the history isn't that old, but
right.
I think what's important, and the reason I bring this up is because, as pleasant as it is to hang out and talk with Native Christians, it's also can be very difficult and challenging to talk with Native people who just, can't believe that I'm a Christian and that I would choose to participate in a church, in any church, and that I would follow this teacher Christ. They just can't even believe it. They're disgusted by it. And I completely understand it. I completely understand that. It's a very righteous anger, but, I pray about that a lot, because I think that's the history of the church in the world, unfortunately. And so we really have to do better as Christians living today to inhabit our faith in a joyful way, so that we are good witness just by our lives, right? It's not about getting out there and saying, hey, do you want to become an Orthodox, but it's more like, what makes Orthodox people happy, and why, what tools do they have to help them get through life in a way that allows for them to have this peace and joy. And that's what is going to, right? That's the best message. That's the best way to share the message. And so
Preach always and use words sometimes. Is it something like that? There's a beautiful quote like that. But this idea that we can preach God's love through our behavior and through our lives, and let people look at us and see the love of Christ in us,
Yes.
and then ask themselves, wow, why is that person, glowing with love in this way, as opposed to, it's a lot better than standing on a street corner yelling about fornicators, as people used to do in Berkeley. When I was in college, it was always the guy with the microphone yelling at everybody, telling them how sinful they were. And it was like, I'm not sure. I wonder if that ever works, but
I think it does. I think it does,
and it must. They keep doing it.
I remember there was a priest that I met when I was, learning about Orthodoxy. His name's Father Gregory Safchuk. He was at St. Innocent in Tarzana, California, and I visited his church and visited with him a lot of times. And one of the things that he said was, many theologians in the Orthodox tradition believe that there are reasons why there are these different expressions of Christianity, because maybe, that's what brings people to Christ, and that's what Christ wants. And so we believe we have found, the place. I mean, I certainly believe it. The place where it's just a wonderful thing to be an Orthodox Christian, and I have been for more than half my life, and I found great solace in the church. But I also have family that are not Orthodox Christians that are just as devout and just as full of joy, and all of those things. So I suspect that that's correct.
I think God is at work all the time, right?
Yes.
He is looking to bring back every lost sheep, and he will do it however it needs to be done. It's really not up to us to decide how he's going to do it, but
absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, okay. Well, we're going to take a short break. We're going to come right back, and we're going to talk some more. I'm excited to hear actually more about what we were already discussing, but also about your conversion and your experiences in the church. So we will be back in a moment. Remember, if you want to call in, you're welcome to do it. 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346. We'll be right back with Rebecca Hernandez.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
For all of us, male or female, parent or not, that's what it's often like, isn't it? It's at the end of our own tether that the miracle happens. It is in our greatest weakness that God's strength is known. It's when we decrease that He can increase. It's in losing our life that we find it. To put it another way, it's in the spot where St. Morwenna falls down, exhausted, that her spring rises up. It's when the people of God curse Moses in the wilderness and wish themselves back in Egypt that they hear the crack of the staff, the gush of water through the rock. It's when God Himself is spat upon and mocked and bleeding and dead that the glorious resurrection is ushered in.
From 7 Holy Women, Conversations with Saints and Friends, now available as an audiobook at Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight speaking with Rebecca Hernandez. And of course, you're welcome to call at any time, 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. But so, Rebecca, we were just talking about Alaska, your trip up for St. Herman's feast day. And St. Herman is this beautiful figure of, in a lot of ways, sort of Russian repentance, right? Like he arrives and he sees what his people are doing, and he's pained for it, and he's working to repair it and to do what he can to pick up the pieces. And, so I love St. Herman for that. But I think you're right. We can't, we have, it's a really difficult history to look at, and it's so much like the history of natives all across. And I always think of it as being Catholic missions in the United States, but as you've mentioned, there are other denominations as well who've had a very similar history with the natives. So when you went up to Alaska and you see all of these, native people worshiping in an Orthodox church in their own language, is that part of what pushed you toward Orthodoxy?
Partly, yes, absolutely, and also too, I want to say that for those folks out there that may not be Orthodox yet and are thinking about it, for me, one thing that really helped tremendously was that about the second year I was studying, learning about Orthodoxy, so I was still I was still Catholic and everything, is that we got a new priest at St. Stephen's, and his name is Nicholas Checo, Father Nick.
Father Nick.
and his incredible wife, Protonitsa Sandra. Because he was new, the timing was really good because they were new and I was kind of new too. And, I was just sort of hanging out and visiting and on Sundays. So I would go to Mass on Saturday night because, of course, for Catholics, Mass is Sundays or Sunday Mass is a day of obligation.
Convenient. It's so convenient. There are so many services.
Right? So, yes. So you have to go. If you're a Catholic in good standing, you go every week. And so Saturday nights I would go to my Catholic parish, and Sundays I would go to St. Stephen's. And I got to really love being there. I started to understand the liturgy better, and got to know Father Nick and Protonitsa Sandra very well. They had young children at that time. And so I lived so close to the church that I would just stop by and talk with her, and we became friends. And I think that having the privilege and the luxury of living so close by that I could come in and, talk with the secretary, Smilka, and other people, that church will always be, and I've since moved many different places and now live in Northern California. I will always think of St. Stephen's as, my home, because that's where I made the transition into Orthodoxy. And that community took a while. I'll be honest, it took a while for them to understand what I was doing there, because just, a convert like that is kind of unusual. Most people convert for marriage. So it was a little bit odd that I was just kind of showing up every week and okay. But then, I'd go and start talking to people. And anyway, so that relationship really helped ground me. And then over time, I started to feel like, I'm believing more of what the Orthodox believe than I do of what the Catholics believe. And I say this with absolute, real sincerity, that converting was probably one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made in my life. I had to get to a place where I was absolutely sure, but from the Catholic perspective, truth being that I was jeopardizing my salvation. That teaching is, something that I believed with my whole heart, that, non-Catholics were really going to have a rough go, right? So I had to really get to the place where I felt like I was prepared to take that step. And when I really was. I had talked and read and, interviewed and just did about everything I could possibly do. And, it was the most difficult decision, but I believe even now it was the best. I have never, ever regretted it or looked back with any, sense of longing. I do miss things, absolutely, but I have found my home in Orthodoxy, and I'm just so blessed by it, So
what a beautiful thing.
To say, we find our way as converts on many roads. There's many roads, as you mentioned, right, to Christ. And for me, it's just interesting that I grew up, not very far from the cathedral, and that's where I converted. And,
Right.
And every time I go back, and one thing that I think is important to mention also, just as a convert, that does not have an affiliation or connection ethnically to any of these, any of the communities that founded churches here, whether they be Greek or Antiochian or Russian or Serbian. I feel like the church, like all of my brothers and sisters at St. Stephen's understand me as part of that community. And there's a kind of, for lack of a better word, a kind of absorption into that community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great compliment. And the Serbs have just, really, like, they're deep in my heart, but also, too, there's a lot that I wish our communities were more ethnically diverse in the Orthodox churches, and I believe that day will come. But now I'm up here, and I want to be sure to say hi to everyone at Prophet Elias Greek Orthodox Church in Santa Cruz, probably the most friendly community you're ever going to meet. And they just embraced me with joy, and I love the community, and it's very different than the Serbian tradition, the Greek tradition. So I've had to learn many new things.
Well, but you have been very lucky, though. These are two of my favorite Orthodox communities in California. Coming from California, there are several that I really love, and those are two of them for sure. But we have a caller who is also Native American and who has a question for you. So I'm actually very excited to hear. Alex, are you there, Alex? Can you hear me?
I am. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Alex, welcome to the program. Do you have a question for our guest, for Rebecca, who I almost called Sandra for no reason? Do you have a question for Rebecca? I don't know where that came from.
I do. Thank you. As Native folk, we sometimes have many names. As Orthodox folk, we sometimes have many names.
Yeah,
isn't that right?
This is true. This is very true.
Very possible. Well, thank you so much for doing this. My name is Alex. I'm indigenously Incan through my father, grandmother before him, so on and so forth. And then also a recent convert to the Orthodox faith. And I guess my question, it's kind of, I think, building off of a lot of the thoughts that you've been contributing most recently. And I'm interested if, the question in short is, are there any either books or organizations or communities that you would recommend, either throughout the United States or anywhere in your experiences, that really can be a good turn for either Orthodox people in general or indigenous people in general to find the intersection between indigeneity and Orthodoxy? And then the slightly larger, but now I won't make it too extravagant context of beyond that is because I think as indigenous people, we sometimes feel living in a colonized world that there really isn't a place for us, that socially or politically, this isn't the world for us, which is very similar to the narrative of Orthodoxy, or at least that's how my experience has interpreted it, is that we pray for, the rulers of the day, of course, at every liturgy, and we pray that, everyone's heart is turned toward the sort of gracious and loving heart of Christ. But it seems like to me, if that was to truly happen, the socio-political apparatuses that be would just fall apart because they are upholding a certain colonial either mindset or power, et cetera. So I guess sometimes it feels lonely, to kind of speak to other either natives or either Orthodox folk and to be hey, listen, we both have so much to say to each other across the aisle. Are there? I mean, I've read Barbara Smith's book on section really on Orthodoxy and Native Americans. Are there any books, articles, or organizations, or even just, I think you were just speaking about different church communities that, have been very good to you throughout the United States. Are there anything that you'd recommend for us to, kind of continue building that bridge as we outside of the world?
Alex, where are you? are you in the United States? Where do you live?
I currently live in Pittsburgh. I'm set to be married and will shortly leave, but I attend St. Moses the Black in Pittsburgh and have been very well nurtured by a semi-similar experience with Father Paul Abernathy, he's just recently published a book on the intersection between the African American and Black cultural experience and Orthodoxy. In a way, I think that resonates in a pretty strong and intimate way. But of course, we indigenous folk, we sometimes are a bit few and far between, or at least in the Northeast, that's how it's often felt for me.
Well, I would say all over, unless you're in Alaska.
Yeah.
But I know we're really short on time. So the one thing that I would say really fed my soul during the period of study that I did was to read about the saints of the Americas, and to learn the Orthodox history within the United States, or what is today the United States. And I just want to say something that I pray about a lot, and I'm so glad you asked, is that it would be wonderful to have some sort of organization that Native people could participate in that are Orthodox, an online community or something that would allow for us to just pray for one another and support each other, because it's lonely in general for Indigenous people. We're oftentimes the only Indigenous person everywhere we go, but certainly in our churches. And so we should continue praying for that and praying about it. And, and perhaps it'll come about in a way that, we'll be surprised by, but really excited about. And best wishes to you as you prepare to marry, and thank you for calling.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. It's great to hear from you.
Thank you so much for your work and your thoughts. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, Alex. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful call, Alex. That was wonderful. And and I do love that sort of, I feel like he was starting to connect a little bit with that sense of like, we're here on earth, but we're really citizens of the kingdom, this sort of sense of always being disconnected. And it's so complicated in Orthodoxy because we also have, as you were bringing in a little bit, we were talking about the Serbian community kind of absorbing you, right? And I know, I have recently married an American who, not an ethnic Orthodox, right? And he's just like, how come everybody keeps telling me I'm an honorary Greek? Like, don't they know I have a culture? Like I come from somewhere that's valuable. I'm not a blank slate walking around waiting to have someone else's culture stamped onto me. And there's that, there's so much complexity about that already. And I think for Native people in the United States, you've already got that complexity. And then you enter into the Orthodox Church and it kind of becomes even, multifold. It becomes even more so because now you're not just a Native person in the United States, but now you're a Native person in the United States among immigrants in the United States who are inviting you to be an immigrant too. And it's like you couldn't be more opposite of immigrant, and yet you have kind of a similar experience to an immigrant because your culture is distant and far away in a sense. But so I just, what is your experience with that? I guess both in the Serbian church and in the Greek church. You mentioned some absorption and how it's a compliment and it's a beautiful thing, but there's something problematic about it, right?
Well, I think, Alex, I don't know if problematic is the word I'd use as much as, as Alex said, right? It can feel lonely. And so, my prayer is always that, we start to see those changes happening in our parishes. And the way that's going to happen is the work that we need to do, work like you're doing with this podcast, right? Talking about experiences in the church and helping people appreciate that, hey, they may not be they're not the only person that feels a little awkward or lonely in their community. There are many of us that are learning how to navigate both the gift of that welcome and love from the existing, parish community, but also asserting ourselves as hey, I also have unique gifts to bring. I also have things I want to talk about. And one of the beautiful things is that Father Milutin, who was our priest for many years here in Santa Cruz and has since left recently, but, he always wanted to celebrate the native saints of the church and talk about them. So again, I think the more we talk with our clergy and say, hey, there's Peter the Eliot, I'd like to celebrate that. There's St. Herman, I'd like to celebrate that. Can we have a liturgy that day? Can we get an icon of that saint? Can we, that's just simple things like that. It becomes something we're doing in the parish, and then we can talk about it. And I think that's just a great way to start.
Well, and I think that's how the love of all the other saints grew, right? Is that as converts, we may not know, but you're welcome to go tell your priest, I'm really fascinated with this saint, and I think we need to develop a relationship with this person. Like we need to bring them into our parish. We need to put their icon on the wall and say an akathist to them or something. That's how all of the other saints on the walls in your church got there, is that there was someone there who called them in, and that it's really okay to be doing that. And I think, what a beautiful bridge, right? To think about the American saints, the saints of the Americas, that it's just, and so often, if you're not in an OCA parish or an Antiochian parish, your parish may not know a lot about them. And I also want to say, as a side note, I know and love Father Milutin, and he's much beloved by my family. And I just love that you and I have all these people in common, Father Nick and Father Milutin. And, that is a beautiful thing about Orthodoxy, that it is a very small world. And there are just there's so many beautiful people in it. But so as you, one of the, I just want to play back this episode for myself and listen to you talk, because I really love the things that you're saying. One of the things that you were just saying is, talking about letting those changes start with us. What do you think is sort of the ideal, especially as you've come in through the Serbian church and the Greek church, and even your experience going into the Catholic church, perhaps? What is the ideal way for us to welcome new people in our parishes? What should we be doing?
Well, I'll tell you what has worked for me, which is that when I first came to Prophet Elias, it was after moving here to Santa Cruz. I was going through a very, very painful time in my life. And I was really hesitant. I'm just being totally honest, because of the pain I was in, unfortunately, I was moving away from God, right? And I knew that I needed to be in church, and I knew that I needed to be in a community. And so from the moment I stepped into that church, and I mean this, I was one of them. It was like, I took the baptismal, or the name when I converted, of Paraskeva or Petka, and I introduced myself as Petka, because when I hear that, I know I'm home. When I hear someone call me Petka, it's like, I just immediately relax, right? and so, of course, Father Milutin was is Serbian. He's still with us.
Still is.
And and he, and so, of course, it was like, wow, we just immediately hit it off. But the gift that he brought as a priest, and the gift of that community, is that everyone who walks through the door, we want to see you back. We hope you, and, do you have any questions? How are you? I mean, it's a small enough community that we know when someone's a visitor. And so that for me was just the blessing from God that, okay, you're home again. Now let's get you rooted, now let's get you. And now I'm on committees, and I love the work that we do together as a community, and I'm blessed by them. So that's, I think, first and foremost. Even if you're a big church, you can volunteer. Believe me, I don't know of a priest that would discourage someone who wanted to volunteer to be at the front door and say, are you visiting today? If you are, hey, here's some information. Here's the booklet you can follow. We hope you'll stick around, have some coffee. I don't know a priest that would say, no, I don't want that to happen. And that is on us. That's on
That's
us.
right.
We go to church every single Sunday. We can figure a way to help, right? To welcome people. And there's great, things can be simple. They don't have to be big, complicated commitments.
That's right.
15 minutes before the service every Sunday is a doable thing.
That's right. That's right.
As is, other small things. I'm really excited. Our church all of the icons in our church were just finished recently. So I'm thinking of ways that, the whole entire church now is filled with icons, and they're just beautiful and such a blessing. And so I'm trying to figure out ways that we can do tours.
Right, exactly. You got to invite the local newspapers in and say, look at this ancient art on our walls. Oh, it's beautiful.
Yes.
I love that. But you're right. It's like Mother Teresa, right? You're not solving world hunger. You're just feeding the person in front of you.
Yes.
It's not that you have to fix all Orthodox hearts everywhere. It's just you walk over and welcome that guy. That's it. It's simple.
Yes.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It has been absolutely a delight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And, I'm just blessed by your show, and I'm so privileged to be on. And thank you again for the invitation.
We were thrilled to have you. And thank you to our audience for joining us again this week. Come on back next week, guys. And thank you to Alex for calling in. And come on back next week, everybody. We'll meet another wonderful Everyday Orthodox Christian. Have a great evening. What a great show. Well, all of you, thank you so much for joining us. And guess who's next? Father Evan Armitage.